Stop for a second because what you're about to do tonight, right before you go to bed, may be quietly working against your brain in ways most people never notice. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to tell you something that rarely gets explained clearly. What you eat in those last 2 to 3 hours before sleep can matter more to your brain than almost anything else you do during the day. And when this window gets it wrong, which happens often after 60, you don't feel it all at once. It shows up gradually. You wake up feeling a little less sharp, a little more foggy, and gradually more forgetful, morning after morning. Over time, patterns like this have shown up repeatedly in how people describe changes in memory and thinking, and sat across from thousands of people trying to understand why their memory felt like it was slipping, why thinking felt slower, why the right words just wouldn't come. And again, the pattern led back to something very simple: what was on their plate at the end of the day? There's one statistic that stopped me when I first saw it. A large study published in the journal Nutrients, looking across aging populations, found that people over 65 who regularly ate certain inflammatory foods within 3 hours of bedtime experienced cognitive decline about 40% faster over a 5 year period than those who didn't. 40% is not a subtle difference. That kind of difference can meaningfully affect how memory shows up later in life. And before we go further, I want you to keep one thing in mind. The number one food on today's list is something that's probably already sitting in your kitchen. You may have been told it's fine. You may even think it's healthy. When we get to it, it's going to shift how you look at your evenings. But first, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me your age, and tell me this: do you usually eat or snack within 2 hours of going to bed? I read every single comment, and your answers help shape what I make next. And if you're somewhere between 60 and 85, this was made with you in mind, so stay with me all the way through. Today, we're counting down 3 foods, starting with the least dangerous and moving to the most damaging, that can quietly interfere with your memory overnight when they're eaten before bed. These aren't rare or unusual foods. They're everyday items, the kind you'll find in your pantry, your fridge, or on a restaurant menu. And the impact doesn't happen while you're awake. It happens during the hours your brain is supposed to be repairing itself. And one of the patterns that shows up right away sits in something that seems completely harmless: processed deli meats. Packaged ham, turkey slices, salami, pepperoni, bologna, even the ones labeled low fat or heart healthy. A lot of people don't question this. I hear it all the time. A small sandwich before bed feels light, easy, not a big deal. There was someone I worked with, Margaret, 71, a retired school teacher in Tucson. She came in frustrated and a little scared. She was missing appointments, losing track of conversations halfway through a sentence, waking up feeling like her mind was wrapped in cotton. Everything else in her routine looked solid. She stayed active, took her vitamins, kept a fairly balanced diet, but every night, without fail, she had a small deli meat sandwich before going to bed. We didn't change everything. We just removed that one habit. Within 6 weeks, she said something I still remember clearly. She told me it felt like someone had turned the lights back on. What's happening there isn't obvious on the surface. These meats are preserved with sodium nitrates. That's what helps them last longer and keep that bright pink color. But once those nitrates enter your digestive system, they don't stay as they are. They interact with proteins and heat and form compounds called nitrosamines. The National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences classifies nitrosamines as probable human carcinogens. That part gets mentioned sometimes. What doesn't get enough attention is what they appear to do inside the brain. Research out of Brown University's Alpert Medical School points to a direct biochemical link between nitrosamine exposure and insulin resistance in the brain. And when that pathway gets disrupted, it doesn't stay abstract. Your brain depends on glucose. That's the fuel your neurons use to fire, communicate, and store memories. Insulin is what carries that fuel in. It's the delivery system. When nitrosamines interfere, that delivery doesn't work the way it should. The fuel is there, but it isn't getting where it needs to go. Brain cells begin to run short even when blood sugar looks normal. That's why some researchers have started referring to Alzheimer's as a kind of type 3 diabetes. This becomes more fragile with age. After 65, the brain's ability to regulate insulin signaling drops by roughly 30% compared to younger adults. The system is already under strain, and layering nitrosamines on top of that, especially at night when metabolism slows and there's no movement to help process what you just ate, builds pressure in a way that's easy to miss in the moment. There's another layer sitting right on top of it: sodium. These processed meats carry a heavy load. A 2 ounce serving of deli turkey can push past 500 milligrams. Lying down after that changes how your body handles it. Blood pressure rises. Blood vessels tighten. Blood flow to the brain, already reduced in the early phases of sleep, drops further. The hippocampus, the part responsible for forming new memories, is extremely sensitive to those shifts. Even small reductions repeated night after night don't stay small, they accumulate. Years later, they show up as memory loss. If something protein based feels necessary before bed, keeping it simple matters. A small portion of plain boiled eggs or a spoonful of almond butter avoids the nitrates and the excess sodium. Adding a few slices of kiwi alongside that has been shown in research out of Taipei Medical University to improve sleep quality and reduce nighttime blood pressure swings, so the combination moves in the opposite direction instead of adding more load. All of the scientific references I'm mentioning are linked below if you want to look at them directly. And hold on to this for a moment, because what's coming next tends to catch people off guard. There's also another version of this pattern that pairs with it, and together they form what I privately think of as a nighttime memory destruction duo. Before we get there, if this is helping you see something you hadn't connected before, take a second and subscribe and give the video a like. That simple action helps this reach more people over 60 who are dealing with these same patterns without realizing it. And it shows up in something even more familiar, something most people don't even question: sweet foods in the evening, not just cake or ice cream. It's cookies, flavored yogurts that are marketed as healthy, granola bars, sweetened cereals eaten late, fruit juice, honey stirred into tea, even those small pieces of chocolate people reach for without thinking twice. If it pushes your blood sugar up quickly, and it's happening within 2 to 3 hours of sleep, your brain ends up carrying the cost. The sequence is straightforward, but the timing changes everything. Sugar that digests quickly drives blood glucose up fast. Your pancreas responds by releasing insulin to bring it back down. In a younger body, that tends to settle into balance. But past 60, and even more so past 70, that insulin response often overshoots. Blood sugar doesn't just come back to baseline, it drops below it. That drop has a name: reactive hypoglycemia. And when it happens while you're asleep, your brain doesn't just ignore it, it reacts. It shifts into a kind of emergency mode. There's data that puts weight behind this. A study published in Diabetologia followed more than 5,000 adults over the age of 60. The ones who experienced frequent nighttime blood sugar swings, the kind tied to eating sugar in the evening, showed smaller hippocampal volume after 4 years compared to those whose blood sugar stayed stable overnight. Smaller hippocampus means less capacity to form and hold onto memories. And it doesn't stop at blood sugar. There's another layer that shows up at the exact time your brain is supposed to be doing its most important work. When glucose spikes at night, cortisol follows. That's your main stress hormone. And timing matters here. Nighttime is when the brain shifts into repair mode. During deep sleep, a system called the glymphatic system activates. It clears out waste, including amyloid beta, the protein tied directly to Alzheimer's. Cortisol interferes with that process. It disrupts deep sleep. It pulls the brain out of those slow wave stages where that cleanup happens. So, when sugar's sitting in that evening window and cortisol rises, the system that's supposed to clean the brain doesn't run the way it should. The waste doesn't get cleared, and it doesn't just happen once. It continues night after night. There's research that shows how quickly that effect can begin. At the University of California, Berkeley, even a single night of disrupted slow wave sleep led to a measurable increase in amyloid beta accumulation in the brain. One night. Stretch that out over months, over years, especially in someone already past 65, already dealing with a natural drop in sleep quality that comes with aging, and the direction becomes hard to ignore. This pattern showed up clearly in someone named Robert, 74, retired engineer in Portland, sharp his entire life. His wife brought him in because something was changing. He was repeating himself, losing track of names he had known for decades, slipping in ways that didn't fit who he had always been. During the day, his diet looked solid, no obvious issues, but every evening the same routine: two cookies and a small bowl of ice cream while watching television. It was familiar, comfortable, something they had done for years. It took 3 separate conversations before he was willing to consider that this one habit, something that felt small, might be driving what he was experiencing. Once he stepped away from that routine, things didn't shift overnight, but they did move. He replaced it with something simple: a small bowl of mixed berries, blueberries, raspberries, blackberries. Those are rich in anthocyanins, compounds that have been linked in research published in the Annals of Neurology to about a 35% slower rate of cognitive decline in older adults. Within 2 months, his wife called back. She said it felt like her husband was back. The repetition had eased. The clarity had returned in a way that was hard to ignore. If something sweet still feels like part of the evening, the adjustment doesn't have to be extreme. A small piece of dark chocolate, 85% cacao or higher, with a few walnuts, changes the direction. The flavonols in the chocolate support blood flow in the brain, and the walnuts provide alpha linolenic acid, an omega-3 fatty acid that research from UCLA has linked to support in hippocampal function. Pairing that with chamomile tea creates a rhythm that works with the brain instead of adding more strain. And what comes next tends to catch people completely off guard, because the most damaging one on this list is usually the one people defend the most. And this is where the biggest surprise usually lands, because the one that causes the most damage is often the one people feel most comfortable defending: alcohol. You can almost hear the response before it's even said. Just one glass of wine. Red wine is supposed to be good for the heart. It helps me relax. It helps me sleep. Those ideas have been repeated for years. But over the last decade, the science around alcohol and the aging brain has shifted in a way that's hard to ignore. There was someone named Patricia, 68, retired nurse in Nashville, very sharp, very well informed. She followed research closely and felt confident that her one glass of red wine each evening was harmless, maybe even beneficial. She came in because something felt off. She described it as word finding difficulty. The word was there, but just out of reach. It was happening dozens of times a day. Along with that, her focus wasn't what it used to be. Her mood felt lower. Her sleep felt broken, even though the wine seemed to help her fall asleep. She stopped the nightly glass. That was the only change. Within 3 months, she estimated that those word finding episodes dropped by around 80%. She said she felt mentally 10 years younger. Part of the confusion around alcohol comes from how earlier studies were interpreted. The idea that moderate drinking might be good for the heart or the brain was built on observational data. Later on, researchers pointed out a flaw called the sick quitter problem. In those studies, the group labeled as non-drinkers often included people who had already stopped drinking because they were unwell. That made the drinking group appear healthier by comparison. When researchers at Oxford followed this more closely, the picture changed. A 30-year longitudinal study, published in the British Medical Journal, looked at brain scans from more than 500 moderate drinkers. Even at what was considered moderate intake, about 14 to 21 units per week, roughly 1 to 1.5 drinks per day, the rate of hippocampal shrinkage was about 3 times higher compared to non-drinkers. That's the part of the brain responsible for forming and holding memories. And it doesn't take heavy drinking to move it in that direction. And the part that tends to be missed most often isn't just the alcohol itself, it's when it's taken. Alcohol does act as a sedative. It can make it easier to fall asleep. That part is real. But what happens after you fall asleep moves in the opposite direction. In the first half of the night, it suppresses REM sleep. That's the stage where the brain organizes memories, processes emotional experiences, and carries out a lot of its internal maintenance. In the second half of the night, as the alcohol is broken down, there's a rebound effect. The brain shifts into lighter, more fragmented sleep. You wake up more often, even if you don't fully remember it. So the night can feel complete, but the restoration isn't there. Deep sleep is reduced, REM is reduced. The parts that matter most don't fully happen. There's data behind that shift. Research published in JMAR Mental Health found that even low amounts of alcohol within 3 hours of bedtime reduced overall sleep quality by about 24% and REM sleep by up to 40%. And after 65, the effect is stronger because the body processes alcohol more slowly. What might take a 35-year-old about 4 hours can take someone in their 70s 6 to 7 hours. So a drink in the evening doesn't stay in the evening, it carries into the middle of the night. That ties directly into the cleaning system we talked about earlier. The glymphatic system, the one that clears waste from the brain overnight, research from the University of Rochester Medical Center, published in Scientific Reports, showed that regular alcohol exposure interferes with that system. The clearance slows down. Proteins associated with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's accumulate more quickly, and there's already a baseline shift with age. After 70, glymphatic efficiency is roughly 40% lower than it is in younger adults. Add alcohol into that, and you're reducing the capacity of a system that's already working with less margin. It's like turning off the last functioning vacuum in a space that needs constant cleaning. There's also a direct effect at the cellular level. Alcohol breaks down into acetaldehyde, which is toxic to neurons. The brain processes part of that load itself. Glial cells respond by triggering inflammation. In a younger brain, that inflammation tends to resolve. In an older brain, where baseline inflammation is already higher, it stacks, it adds to what's already there, and over time, it contributes to the loss of synaptic connections, the links that allow the brain to think, remember, and reason. Long-term data reflects that pattern. A study from the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism found that by 75, individuals who had consumed even moderate amounts of alcohol regularly through their 60s and early 70s showed brain aging that looked 10 to 15 years ahead of their actual age. The brain of a 75-year-old can resemble that of someone in their mid-80s or beyond. If the habit itself matters, the routine, the glass, the moment at the end of the day, that can stay. It's the alcohol that creates the problem. Replacing it changes the direction without removing the ritual. A warm glass of tart cherry juice, unsweetened, diluted with sparkling water, keeps the same structure. Tart cherries naturally contain melatonin and anthocyanins. Research out of Louisiana State University showed increases in melatonin levels along with improvements in sleep duration and quality in people who used it regularly. Another option is a warm golden milk, turmeric, black pepper, and unsweetened oat milk. Curcumin from turmeric has been shown in work from UCLA to reduce neuroinflammation and support memory performance in adults over 60. Paired with magnesium glycinate, it creates a combination that aligns with what the brain is trying to do at night instead of working against it. And this is really why I spend so much time talking about this. I've watched too many people change in ways they never expected. People who are sharp, engaged, fully themselves, slowly losing pieces of that without understanding why. I've seen husbands struggle to recall their wives' names. I've seen grandmothers who once spoke multiple languages pause in the middle of a sentence, unable to find the next word. I've sat with families who didn't realize that what they were seeing had been building quietly for years, in everyday habits, in the food sitting in the kitchen, in what felt like harmless routines at the end of the day. And the part that matters here is this: you're not locked into that path. Even at 65, 70, even 80, the brain still has the ability to adapt, to form new connections, to improve how it functions. That capacity doesn't disappear. It slows, but it's still there. That's what's referred to as neuroplasticity, which means What you do tonight is not small. What you choose to eat in those final hours shapes what your brain looks like years from now. It shapes whether you stay independent, whether your memory holds, whether you remain fully present for the people around you, or begin to fade in ways that feel gradual at first and then harder to reverse. Every person I mentioned earlier started in that same place. Margaret in Tucson, Robert in Portland, Patricia in Nashville. All of them were already in their 60s or 70s. All of them thought it might be too late to change anything meaningful. And all of them saw real measurable shifts once they adjusted what they were doing. So just try this once. Tonight, look at what's in that window before sleep, the last couple of hours. If there are processed meats, anything preserved with sodium and nitrates, notice it. If there's sugar in dessert, in tea, in something labeled as a healthy snack, notice that too. And if there's alcohol in that routine, even just one drink, change it for one night. Replace it with something that supports what your brain is trying to do instead of interfering with it. Try it for just one night and pay attention to how you feel the next morning. If this helped you connect something you hadn't seen before, pass it along to someone in your life who's over 60, a spouse, a sibling, a friend, someone who would want to understand this before it becomes a problem they can't explain. And before you go, make sure you're subscribed. There's new research coming out every week, and this is about turning that into something you can actually use. If this kind of biology matters to how your body functions day to day, subscribe now. One more thing. Tell me in the comments which of these surprised you the most, the processed meats, the sugary snacks, or the alcohol, and which one feels hardest to step away from. Include your age as well. I read through all of it, and it shapes what I look into next. Your brain matters. Your memories matter. And you matter.